I think there are a lot of people who agree with the assessment that ending the civil war in Syria is one of the keys in enabling the United States as well as Russia and our other partners, some 60 plus, to focus on defeating ISIL. I think that is generally acknowledged, and I certainly agree with that. One of the advantages that ISIL has is its ability to recruit young men and women and influence actors around the world through its online media campaign, and San Bernardino is just the most recent example. In your opinion, how can we counter this or overcome the effectiveness of ISIL's online presence? And I realize that this is an issue that should be addressed not just by, perhaps not even mainly by you, but FBI and the Director of National Intelligence, Homeland Security, with whom you met. So what do we have to do to debase ISIL's ability and its success in motivating lone wolves in our country and all across the world in committing terrorist acts?
Well, you're right. Here at home, the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security and Director of National Intelligence are working along those lines to identify those who are self-radicalizing or plotting using the internet. And when I want to speak for them, I can only tell you that they're intent upon solving that problem. There is a role, I would say, not in that fight, but it is related to the fight we are waging, because it's why I think it's important to strike at and eliminate the parent tumor in Syria and Iraq, because that's part of the creation of the narrative that fuels the internet, which fuels even lone wolves. And also where we are able to eliminate people who are trying to recruit our people. I think the chairman referred earlier to the elimination of Junaid Hussain, which I reported to you when I was last up here. He was somebody who was trying to recruit Americans to attack Americans, no doubt about it. So there are some things even we can do, and not only even we can do as the Department of Defense to assist in this, but there's a big effort by Director Comey and Secretary Johnson and the Director of National Intelligence, the Director of Central Intelligence on this effort. Now, it began well before San Bernardino, but San Bernardino illustrates why this is no kidding important thing to do.
Would you say that debasing the ability of ISIL to motivate lone wolves, people who don't even have any direct contact with ISIL, but who have access to their ideology and through the internet, that this is more of a whole of government approach that we need to take that includes law enforcement and local law enforcement, as well as people in the community?
Yes, this whole campaign really is a whole of government campaign, has to be. In today's world, all these pieces need to be connected.
Mr. Chairman, my timer is not working, so I have absolutely no idea how much time I have left. Well, in that case, I will stop here.
Okay. I'd say the senator.
I just have one last question. Then we talk about defeating ISIL, and really, what does that look like? I mean, what does defeating ISIL look like? Including the preventing the ability of them to encourage the lone wolf actors all across the world.
In Iraq and Syria, which, as I said, is necessary, not sufficient, but necessary. It means destroying their organization, their leadership, their ability to control territory, their ability to have a source of revenue, and their ability to claim that they're anything but a bunch of barbarians, that they're a state. That's what eliminating them, and that's the end state that we're seeking in Iraq and Syria. And of course, to make that stick gets us back to what others have been talking about, the political dimension of it. But from the military point of view, that's the objective.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'd like to return to this question of no-fly zones. So, General Selva, your testimony is that the United States has the military capability to impose a no-fly zone over Syria.
Yes, sir.
A little over 2 weeks ago, Turkey shot down a Russian aircraft for violating Turkish airspace. How many Russian aircrafts have violated Turkish airspace since that incident?
None that I know of.
Do you think we can infer a lesson from Vladimir Putin's conduct in the aftermath of that shoot-down, since he had
I think-
repeatedly violated Turkish airspace beforehand?
I think I'd be very careful in inferring his decision process to that particular set of circumstances, because what the Russians have done as a consequence of that shoot-down is to beef up their integrated air defense. They brought surface-to-air missiles into their base in Latakia. They've installed surface-to-air missiles around Aleppo. They have worked with Syrian partners, and the Syrian partners now have their radars active, which they didn't have just a few weeks ago. So I think it is that set of consequences when we think about no-fly zones that we have to factor into our calculus. If a no-fly zone is to be defended and it is to have effect on the ground, the consequences of activity by surface-to-air missile systems and air defense aircraft have to be factored into the equation. We have the capability to deal with those. The consequence is a direct confrontation with Russia or Syria.
Thank you. Secretary Carter, I noticed that you were smirking at my question. Could I get your take on that?
No, I'm sorry. I was smiling at General's
I think it might deserve a
observation
smirk.
correctly,
I'm
that it's
not
hard to know. I was
rebuking you.
No. I was smiling about inferring Vladimir Putin's intentions. He rightly said it. It's a little hard to know. That's all. I was just.
Well, I would submit that he repeatedly violated Turkish airspace until Turkey defended its airspace, and he has not done so since then, and that maybe we can learn a lesson from that. Also want to return to the point that Senator Ayotte was discussing about the oil trucks that we struck shortly after the Paris attacks. I believe it was a little over 100. Can you explain why that didn't happen earlier? I mean, why that didn't happen 6 months ago, a year ago?
There are two principal reasons. First is the development of the actual intelligence as to the contribution of those particular routes to the finances of ISIL. With respect to the chairman, those are that black and gray economy in oil across the region.
Yeah, and I understand that. And I understand that intelligence can often be hard to develop, especially when you don't have a presence on the ground, but I don't understand what's hard to develop intelligence about tanker trucks leaving refineries in ISIS-controlled space.
The second point, Senator, is that in an effort to minimize the civilian casualties, the drivers of those trucks are not necessarily adherents to ISIL's ideology, but are Syrians trying to make.
I have no doubt about that. They're
So-
probably Syrians who are driving trucks, and Islamic State said, drive this truck or we're going to kill you and cut the heads off your kids.
So I actually visited with the unit that prosecuted the attacks on the bulk of those vehicles. And they used a set of tactics, techniques, and procedures that warned the drivers in advance so they could flee their trucks, and then destroyed the trucks in situ. We're looking for more opportunities to do exactly the same thing so that we don't alienate the civilian population, those that are not ISIL adherents, and continue to degrade the infrastructure for production.
And I strongly support that, and I'm aware of the TTPs you're discussing, but those are things that our Air Force have done for a long time to minimize civilian casualties. We didn't just develop these TTPs in the last month, did we? I mean, we could leaflet civilians 6 months ago or 12 months ago, right?
They are not new TTPs, but the opportunities and the places with which to use them are a product of the intelligence that we developed from our understanding of the oil infrastructure and distribution network that supports it.
I'd like to talk about now the Rules of Engagement Decision-Making Authority. One constant thing I've heard from senior commanders down to low-level troops in my travels in the region and here in the United States is that decisions that were being made in the middle part of the last decade by O5s are now being made by 3- and 4-star generals or even civilians in Washington, and that the rules of engagement have been incredibly restrictive, as the example of this oil tanker truck example. Secretary Carter, do you care to comment on what I've been hearing from troops directly on my trips? And visits
I'll
with them?
start, and then I do want General Selva to represent professional military judgment in this matter, so I'd like him give him the opportunity to speak as well. The commanders there, the air commanders, have told me, and I'll let General Selva and General Dunford have reported to me about limitations on the effectiveness of the air campaign, and I have asked about whether our rules of engagement are a limiting factor that is stopping them from being more effective. And just two things I'd say about that, and then I'll let General Selva go into more detail. They have not changed over time. And by the way, these are not things that are approved in Washington or anything. These are things that are done by the air operators in theater, which is appropriate. The things that have really enabled our air, well, let me turn it around and say the things that have limited it from time to time our air campaign have been, first of all, annoyingly weather. And that was true a month and a half ago for a couple of weeks. But then and that's important, more fundamentally has been intelligence. And we've gotten a lot better intelligence picture now, and therefore able to conduct more effective strikes, which is one reason why we're able to conduct more strikes, absorb more air capability because we could get into Incirlik, from which the sorties were shorter, absorb more capability from the French and others, and put it to good use because we could develop the targets. And I always say it's better to have more airplanes than targets than airplanes. And so on some days, a sortie goes out for dynamic targeting as opposed to deliberate targeting. Deliberate targeting, the bombs are almost always dropped, more than 90%. Dynamic targeting is where you go out there and hope that a target that you're thinking might develop actually does develop. That's an important thing to do because it's what stops ISIL from being able to use the road safely, having to drive at night with their lights off, all that kind of stuff. And you don't always find those targets, and so sometimes the airplanes come back with the bombs off. It's intelligence that makes all the difference. General, please.
Senator, I've met a soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine who wouldn't ask for looser ROE in any active fight. But having consulted with the commanders, from the JTF all the way up to Central Command, I know of no rules of engagement restrictions that have prevented us from striking targets and that prevented our forces from being as effective as they can be on the ground. I've consulted with all of them.
Thank you. I'm over time, but Senator Reid, if I can have one moment to ask a more lighthearted question of General Selva. For 60 years, NORAD and the Air Force has been tracking Santa over the skies of North America. Can you assure the boys and girls of this country that NORAD and the Air Force is fully prepared to track Santa once again?
I don't have a complete intelligence report, Senator, but I understand that the reindeer have been, in fact, fed their quantity of oats and are prepared for the delivery of all of those gifts to those who have been nice and not naughty.
Well, I think it's a welcome reminder that while most Americans are at home enjoying Christmas with their families, that our airmen, soldiers, sailors, and Marines, whether they're in NORAD or around the world, are out there keeping us safe and defending our values and what makes this country great.
Sir, not to extend the questioning and the answering, but I did spend my Thanksgiving with our troops in Iraq, in Baghdad, Taji, and Erbil, and I can report to you that their morale is high, and they did phone home and talk to the people who love them.
Thank you very much for reminding us of the service and sacrifice of so many, Senator. And on behalf of Chairman McCain, Senator Nelson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Carter, I gave a speech recently and showed the map of Syria and Iraq and the area that ISIS used to occupy that it no longer occupies, and the area that it occupies now that it did not occupy. And the difference is dramatic, that you all have shrunk the territorial occupation of ISIS, and you are to be congratulated on that. But at the end of the day, as you all have already testified, Syria is not going to be able to contain ISIS until at least there is a plan for the exit of President Assad. Now, when that occurs, what is the Arab force that is going to be on the ground with the guidance of our special operations forces? Give me a concept of what that makeup is of that Arab force.
Well, it's a very good question, and it gets to the issue of the end state of the campaign here and the critical political ingredient, because a political transition in Syria is essential to a durable end state to this, because it's the civil war in Syria that started this whole business in Syria. And that would mean, and at that time, the force that is now not available because they're fighting each other, but that could fight ISIL, is the combination of Syrian forces and the moderate opposition that is now fighting Syria. If there's a political settlement, in the meantime, we're using forces, some Kurds up north, the YPG, and we're trying to accumulate additional Syrian Arabs who want to take their homes back from ISIL. But the civil war is, meanwhile, using up a lot of combat power that could potentially be used against ISIL.
So you really believe that once there's a path for Assad to leave, that Syrian government forces, which include Alawites, which are Shia, are going to join up with the opposition Sunni forces to go after ISIL?
The political transition is exactly to have a Syria that is once again whole, multi-sectarian, for sure, like all those states over there with all the complications that go with that and that we see in Iraq. But that as an alternative to sectarianism and the continuation of sectarian civil war, yes.
So go over to Iraq. Is that anti-sectarian? Is it working with the forces on the ground that we're supporting from the air?
Well, first of all, Prime Minister Abadi, I've spoken to him frequently. I'll have an opportunity to speak to him in coming days when I too will be visiting our troops in theater. Is committed precisely to that kind of vision for Iraq. I believe him. I've talked to him.
Do you think it's working?
Well, that's whether he can pull it off in Baghdad is obviously a difficult matter for him. We are supporting him in that regard because we believe that the alternative, which is further sectarian division, civil war, cleansing, and so forth, we've seen that before. And if he can keep his vision of an Iraq, which he called is decentralized, so it's not everybody under the thumb of Baghdad, because he knows the Kurds and the Sunnis won't go for that, but still the ability to retain an integral state that keeps peace within its borders. That's what he's committed to. That's the end state we also want in Iraq.
Right. So it's possible that with Assad leaving Syria, you could get Syria under control, but everything could go haywire in Iraq.
There are two separate dynamics. There's one thing I'll mention that I mentioned when I was with you 6 weeks ago, and has subsequently come to pass. I was talking about the importance of getting the town of Sinjar. You're talking about territory, but a lot of that territory is empty, and it's the towns that matter. The critical crossing of Sinjar. Now, what is Sinjar? Sinjar is a place in between Mosul and Raqqa. And to cut ISIL into its Syrian branch and stop them from cross-feeding is the objective of taking Sinjar. And so in the end, the political end states are different for Syria and Iraq, absolutely.
Understand. Mr. Chairman, if I may, just one quick question, because the Department of Defense has asked for $116 million reprogramming to keep the effort of General Nagala's training program. Do you support the restarting of that program?
I urgently support that funding, but I don't describe it, and the documents we sent you don't describe it as a restarting of the old program. As I described earlier, we learned from the old program. It had some success, but not nearly what we had hoped for. And I've told you that from me, that was a disappointment. And so I'm very upfront about that. But what we're asking for is funds that were previously earmarked for that to an approach that we think is more effective, which is precisely one of the ones I've been describing today. That's why we would urgently like that fund. And I just, I mean, people decry micromanagement, but micromanagement also can come from many sources, and I would urge you please to avoid that. Give us that funding that we've requested. We submitted the paperwork. I know the chairman said a week ago, and I apologize if it was that recently. My understanding was more than that. But this is a war, and I'd simply urge you, I know you're very busy people, have lots of things to do, but if you can please give that your earliest attention.
We will, Mr. Secretary. We also, obviously, as I mentioned before, would like to know the details of how it's used, and I think that's appropriate. I thank you.
Fair enough.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here today. On November the 12th, the President answered the question, is ISIS gaining strength, by saying, I don't think they're gaining strength, and I believe we've contained them. Now, 2 weeks before that interview in Ankara, we saw 2 bombs kill 102 people. In the Sinai, we saw 224 people lose their lives when the Russian jetliner was down. On the day of his interview in Beirut, 2 suicide bombers killed 43. And then the day after his interview, a wave of 6 terrorist attacks killed 130 in Paris. And then on December 2, 14 Americans were killed. Right now, in another committee hearing down at Judiciary Committee, I stepped in for a minute before I came back here, Director Comey said that America's at its highest threat level since 9/11. So I'm trying to square a statement made by our President on November 12th that they're not gaining strength and that we have contained them with a comment that you made in the opening, I think in response to the chairman's question about how we contain them. What am I missing in terms of you saying that we haven't contained them? The President says that we have, and that they're not gaining strength with the events that I've just summarized there. Secretary Carter, I'll start with you, and then General Selva.
We have to defeat ISIL.
I agree with that, but a part of it is, right, excuse me, because I want to try to stick to the time. A part of it has to do with the President acknowledging the current situation. Do you agree with this characterization, that they're not gaining strength? And
The President has asked me and asked our military leaders to give him recommendations and to keep giving him recommendations to defeat ISIL. And he has approved all the ones that we've taken to him. We expect to take more. And I think that's
Secretary Carter, have you told the President that they're not gaining strength and that we've contained them?
I have not used. General Dunford talked about tactical containment versus strategic containment, if we're going to use that word. I kind of like the word defeat myself, Senator.
General Selva, I want to ask you a question about some of the airstrikes. I know that you were talking about the rules of engagement, and it seems to make sense to try and protect the civilian drivers and the tankers, et cetera. Back in June, the military officials acknowledged that 75% of the planes flying combat missions returned without dropping their weapons. You, in response to Senator Ayot's question, said that that's now about 40%. What's changed?
Senator, we've increased the number of deliberate strikes, pre-planned, designated targets, as opposed to having airplanes looking for dynamic targets in the environment. We have sufficient air power in the region to accomplish both, but in any case of dynamic targeting, some of those airplanes are always going to come back with their ordnance because targets don't present themselves.
Thank you. And a former Deputy Director, Mike Morrell of the CIA, made in a comment on November the 25th that we didn't go after oil wells, actually hitting oil wells that ISIS controls, because we didn't want to do environmental damage and we didn't want to destroy infrastructure. Are those still key factors in whether or not you go after ISIS targets?
I don't know of the rules of engagement that he's talking about, but as we develop deliberate targets, we do bring environmental considerations into the factors that we consider, but they do not limit us from striking the infrastructure They just changed the way we strike it. So we try to do as little environmental damage as possible, but still limit the capacity of the well to produce.
And Secretary Carter, maybe just to close out with this, just to go back to defining the problem, if we shift, and you made the distinction between tactical and strategic containment, but if we shift to a global perspective, away from the narrow focus of maybe tactically what we're doing in Iraq and Syria, is there any grounds for describing ISIS as contained?
I'll let General Dunford, who's not here, speak for himself. I described, and I think we need to be concerned about, we've talked about metastasis to the homeland, and we've talked about the necessity of getting the parent tumor. We have not discussed as much the necessity of going after ISIL elsewhere. I mentioned Libya. We took out its leader in Libya. We're going to have to do more in Libya. ISIL is becoming a magnet for groups that previously existed in some cases, that are now rebranding themselves as ISIL. But it's worse than that, because they're also gaining energy from the movement in Iraq and Syria, which is why we need to destroy it in Iraq and Syria. But this is a worldwide phenomenon. And I've talked to leaders. I was recently talking to some leaders in Southeast Asia, actually, about many things. But one of the things they raised is concern about little patches of ISIL and self-radicalization of the kind that we find. So in the internet age and the social media age, terrorism doesn't have any geographic bounds. So I think we have to recognize that while we need to attack it geographically on the ground in Syria and Iraq, that is necessary. It's not sufficient.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for your service and your testimony. Secretary Carter, do you agree with a recent study done by the RAND Corporation suggesting that it would be wise for Congress to pass a new authorization for use of military force against ISIL?
I haven't seen that study, Senator. I have testified in favor of the AUMF that the President submitted, and I welcome that. It's not necessary, literally, in the sense that we're able to conduct our campaign.
The study, I would just encourage you to take a look, because I think it backs up your position. It was reported 2 days ago, says that an authorization by Congress would send a message of resolve to our allies, would send a message of resolve to ISIL, it would send a message of resolve to the troops. And RAND, which is, not biased on the legal analysis, said that at a minimum, the connection of the battle against ISIL to the 2001 and 2002 authorizations requires, quote, legal gymnastics that it would be wise to clear up. Secretary Carter, what message does it send to the 3,600 troops that are deployed overseas in this fight at the holidays, and to the families of the 11 service members who've lost their lives in Operation Inherent Resolve and the 5 others who've been wounded, that Congress has been unwilling to debate and vote upon this war in the 16 months since it started?
I think that the passage of an AUMF, as you indicate, and this is one of the reasons why I testified in favor of it, would be a signal of resolve and support to our troops. Therefore, I think it is desirable. By the way, a signal of resolve to our enemies. I should say that's not the only thing. I think when you visit them, as some of you have done in the last week, when you hold a hearing like this and show that you care what they're doing, when you go back to your bases and at home and tell them how proud you are of them, the family members that are back here, so all that stuff's incredibly important. They need to know we're behind them. And I always tell our people, I'm 1,000% behind you. And if this would add to it, that's good.
Our chairman, Senator McCain, was quoted last week. Now, this was not an approving quote. This was a critical quote, in the same way that I am critical of the current status of affairs where Congress has been silent for 16 months. The quote was that a congressional vote to authorize war against ISIL doesn't seem forthcoming now because of politics here, and that a quote may require an attack on the United States of America to force such a vote. Would it be wise for Congress to wait that long?
Again, I am in favor of the one that the President submitted. I think on balance it would be a positive thing and a sign that the country's behind the troops. And provided it allowed me and General Selva and our military leaders to do what we think is needed to defeat ISIL, provided it does that, I think the signal it sends of resolve by this country is a good thing.
At least 3 nations on the UN Security Council, England, France, and I'm very sorry to say, Russia, have submitted to their legislative bodies for a debate and vote their engagement in military action in Syria and Iraq, and other nations such as Germany have done the same. The President started the war against ISIL 16 months ago yesterday. There's only been 1 vote in the Senate. It was a Senate Foreign Relations Committee vote a year ago Friday. There hasn't really been action in the House. I just hope that we would follow, I'd hate to say this, I hope we would follow the lead of other nations whose legislative bodies have decided it was important enough to have a debate and vote on this before the public. Second issue I want to just bring up, and this is more just kind of an observation for you. Senator McCain was the first to call for the no-fly zones, and at the time that he started that, I didn't agree with him, and the reason I didn't is that there were testimony from General Dempsey and others here that to do a no-fly zone would run the risk of running across the Syrian air defenses. To many of us on the committee, that argument fell away when the administration came and proposed an aerial attack on Syria after the use of chemical weapons against Bashar al-Assad. And when we reminded them, hey, wait a minute, you said Syria has really tough air defenses, the administration testimony at that point was, yeah, well, we're not that worried about them. Let me tell you why I think the absence of the humanitarian zone is going to go down as one of the big mistakes that we've made, equivalent to the decision not to engage in humanitarian activity in Rwanda in the 1990s. With respect to Syria, there's been testimony from the military to us that the Syrian air defense system is really not all that great and that we could take care of it. And with respect to Russia, Russia voted for Security Council Resolution 2139 in February of 2014, calling for cross-border delivery of humanitarian aid into Syria without the permission of Bashar al-Assad. There are a few guarantees in life, but I can pretty much give you this one. Russia would not intervene and try to mess around with us if we were engaged in a humanitarian effort that was premised upon a UN Security Council resolution that they actually voted for. And since February of 2014, we've had the ability and the legal rationale to enforce that resolution, and we haven't. And millions of refugees have left the country. If we had done that then, I think we'd be in a much better place now. And I think we can still do it, and we'd be in a much better place. So just in terms of the argument about here's why we don't think it's a good idea, previous testimony to the committee by folks from the Pentagon have undercut your argument with respect to Syria and Russia. Mr. Chair, I don't have any other questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Secretary and General, thank you for your service. The President addressed the nation Sunday night. Did you hear his address, Mr. Secretary?
I did not. I read it.
Okay. Do you believe that we're at war with ISIL?
I do.
Do you believe they're at war with us? The answer is yes.
yes.
Yeah. They would hit our homeland if they could.
For sure.
Okay.
They say that. They indicate that openly.
Is there any place on the planet that you would take off limits when it comes to fighting ISIL?
No, I don't think we can do that for the reasons I said earlier. They are metastasizing everywhere, and everywhere there are information media. There are going to be people who go online who maybe have never been to Syria or Iraq or even know where they are.
The answer is
they only know
no.
where their screen is.
Right, I agree with you. I think that's a very good answer. There's no place on the planet we should give them safe haven. Number two, when it comes to time in terms of this war, when will it end?
As soon as we can possibly bring it to
5 years, 10 years, does anybody know?
Well, I think that
do you want to put a time limit on how long we should fight it?
I think in war, it's good to have plans. I think it was Eisenhower.
Here's my question. Are you willing to put a time limit on how long we can fight ISIL?
I think we have to fight ISIL until ISIL's defeated everywhere.
I couldn't agree with you more. When it comes to means, do you believe this country should use all lawful means when it comes to fighting ISIL, depending on what the circumstances dictate?
Sure.
Do you think Raqqa, Syria will be in the hands of ISIL by January 2017, more or less likely?
I'm sorry, you said which ones?
Do you think Raqqa, Syria will be in the hands of ISIL?
Oh, I very much hope that it won't. Well, that
you think it's
it
more
will either
likely
not be in the hands of ISIL, or that their control will be substantially eroded.
Okay,
I hope that. I can't guarantee
Right,
that. You can't guarantee anything
right.
anymore, but
Hope-
that's certainly an objective.
We all
as soon as
agree.
possible.
We all hope, but we're not going to get there on hope. So you're a good man. I'm not trying to fight you here. Here's what I've done. I'm making an offer to our president that I believe this war is going to go on for a long time after his presidency. I believe that they're going to go wherever they can on the planet, and that we should stop them wherever necessary. And when it comes to means, we should not limit this commander-in-chief or any other commander-in-chief when it comes to means. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do.
So I have an authorization to use military force, Senator King. It's not limited by geography. It's not, could you put it up, please? It's not limited by geography, time, or location. It represents a theory, and future presidents need to have the same capabilities against ISIL as we gave that existed after 9/11 regarding al-Qaeda. So I agree with Senator King that the Congress should be involved. I am answering the request of the President to get involved. And here's the question. As Secretary of Defense, could you support an authorization using military force that has no limit on geography, time, or lawful means when it comes to destroying ISIL?
Well, I'm not going to invent a new AUMF here. This is the first time I've studied yours. I'm sorry to say. I did support the President's AUMF for two principal reasons. The first was because I thought it could, exactly as you say, permit us to conduct the campaign that we need to do to defeat ISIL. And that's critical. It did have a time dimension in it, which
From a military point of view, General, do you think saying you're going to have a time dimension is probably a wrong signal to send to the enemy?
The context of the time signal makes a difference. I would prefer not to have one.
Okay.
So I could say to them, I'm going to prosecute you anywhere I find you.
That's what I
long
want to
as I
say.
need.
I want to say to this president that I want to give you the tools, that time is no factor when it comes to destroying ISIL, and location doesn't mean a damn thing. We're after you wherever you go, as long as it takes whatever's required to defeat you. That's the statement I think America needs to make. Is that a fair statement, Mr. Secretary? As whatever it takes, as long as it takes, wherever we need to go to destroy you when it comes to ISIL.
Well, I mean, that's okay from the point of view of conducting the military campaign. You have to get the votes.
No, I know.
Yeah,
but you know what, but I'm not
predict.
asking you to
I'm not going to
vote.
try to craft what can be passed here, Senator. I've testified in favor of the AUMF. The President
Would you vote for this?
Submitted.
Would you vote for this?
I don't know. I'm seeing it for the first time.
Well, as
not a senator.
Secretary of Defense, do you support the concept that the President has
I support an AUMF that the President submitted
Do you
that gives
support
us the authority to wage the war that we need
Just-
to wage. That's
Mr.
the important
Secretary,
thing.
Do you support the concept, the authority, that this President should, no time limits placed on his ability to fight the war? Do you support that concept?
I think the AUMF as submitted only recognizes that his term of office
I'm not
comes
asking
to
you
an
about
end
his AUMF.
in a year.
Right, I agree with that. Do you agree the next president, whoever he or she may be, should have a AUMF not limited by time? That's just a smart decision from the military point of view. Do you agree with that?
Well, it's not.
Are you as Secretary of Defense telling me that you want to put limits in terms of time regarding how long
I'm
we
trying to
fight?
explain to you why, as I explained to this committee before, why I understood that there was the 3-year time thing.
I'm not asking you
in
about
the provision, and it was not for a military reason.
Okay, right,
It was in deference to a future president.
Yeah, okay.
And you can agree or disagree with
Right.
that, but that was the reason why it was included in there, and that was a political reason,
Right.
having to do
From
with
a
our
military point
constitutional
of view,
system, not a military reason.
From a
Okay,
military, listen to me, please. From a military point of view, you don't want time limits.
I don't think we can. I don't.
From
I
a
think
military point of view, you don't want geographical limits.
we can't have
And
geographical.
from a military point of view, you don't want to take means off the table that are lawful when it comes to destroying
And
ISIL.
that are useful
Yeah.
to this campaign.
So to the Congress, if you don't like what this president or future president does in terms of fighting ISIL, defund it. That's your job. I am making a simple proposition to this president that I will give you whatever you need in terms of my authorization to go wherever you need to go, as long as it takes to use whatever available tools you have within legal limits to destroy this threat. Mr. President, are you all in or not? Now, the Secretary of Defense seems to be indicating this is good military policy. To my colleagues on the other side, if we produce an authorization to use military force restricted by time, means, or geography, you're sending a message to the enemy I will not send. You're restricting our ability to defend this homeland, which is an imminent attack is coming. So I want to have this debate, like Senator Kaine has suggested, and it is imperative that the Congress get off the sidelines. Tim Kaine and I may have a different outcome, but you're absolutely right. Let's have a discussion. Let the enemy know without hesitation there's no limitations on time, means, or location when it comes to destroying ISIL. Mr. President, embrace this authorization for you and future presidents because the country needs it. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary and General, for your fine service.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your service, Mr. Secretary General, and thank you for being here. I've just come from a vote on the floor, but before that, a hearing of the Judiciary Committee where FBI Director Comey was testifying about many subjects related closely to the subject matter of your testimony. Even though the geography may be different, the threat is the same. And clearly, the strategy for confronting that threat of terror has to be coordinated and targeted to what poses the danger to our nation. And my feeling is, I agree with you, the reality is we are at war. That's the stark, irrefutable reality. And more needs to be done, more aggressively, more intensely, and more effectively in using our special operators, advising local forces, supplying and equipping them, providing them with intelligence, intercepting communications of our adversaries, and cutting off the flow of money, which is their lifeblood. And the pace of our present activities seems inadequate. Now, we may differ on that point, and you have more on-the-ground knowledge than I do, but the American people are growing impatient and apprehensive. I think that statement, in fact, is an understatement. So I would like to see our strategy become more aggressive and intensify in combating this threat abroad, in the theater where we confront ISIL, and at home where we confront terror in our neighborhoods and streets, and where the adversary is just as real and potentially growing just as alarmingly. Are you satisfied that the intersection and coordination between those two efforts in the Middle East and elsewhere in the world and internally at home is sufficiently aligned and coordinated that we have the most effective strategic approach?
I met just yesterday with Director Comey, also along with the Director of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper. John Brennan's out of the country, but his somebody from the CIA was there, and other agencies working to do exactly what you rightly know is necessary, namely to align our efforts overseas, which involve exactly the ingredients that you name. And you're right, we are looking for opportunities to do more by using precisely the tools you described. We're finding them and we're strengthening and gaining momentum in the military, which we need to do because we need to defeat ISIL over there as soon as possible. Back here, we haven't, it's a different kind of challenge, but it's related. Director Comey's working extremely hard and skillfully on that, and the purpose of my calling this meeting yesterday was precisely to make sure that we're all aligned. We'll continue to do that periodically. And there are things, by the way, that we can do as DOD, even though we obviously don't operate here in the United States the way the FBI does, in terms of striking their information infrastructure in the same way we strike their energy infrastructure, their command and control, and so forth in Iraq and Syria.
I thank you for that answer. I agree totally that the efforts need to be aligned, and in fact, better aligned, more seamless than they are now in terms of intelligence sharing and intelligence gathering, but also working with our partners in the region, because the troops on the ground need to be local. We cannot send American troops back to that part of the world in massive numbers with a combat mission. There's always the danger of mission creep, even in the small number, but I remain dissatisfied that the number of special operators on the ground may be insufficient, and the pace of sending them there may be too lengthy, and that local forces like the Peshmerga have shown that a robust effort involving all of those ingredients that are planned to be sent can make a difference if they're timely and sufficient. And I agree finally that an authorization for the use of military force is absolutely essential. The reality is we are at war, and the President deserves a declaration of war. And that declaration may define the kind of conflict that we see and provide a forum for debate about the limits we may want to put on them, but at least it will provide a framework for public support that the President needs for this continuing war. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to both of you for all you do for us to keep us safe. I want to start by echoing some of the concerns that have been stated by my colleagues, Senator Kaine and Senator Blumenthal. Like them, I feel like for constitutional reasons, we ought to be following the process in the Constitution. For some of the reasons mentioned by Senator Graham, I think it's important to have the debate and the discussion about the extent of our involvement there, and that's another nice process associated with following the constitutional structure. After the failure of the initial train and equip program in Syria, the Department of Defense seems to have shifted its focus to equipping forces that are already on the ground in Syria, such as the Syrian Kurds and Arab groups that we have somehow, in one way or another, using methods that I'm not familiar with, deemed to be moderate or deemed to somehow have interests that overlap with ours. Mr. Secretary, can you explain to us how specifically we're vetting these groups, how we decide who ought to be the beneficiary of this program?
You're basically right. That is the shift we made. Although we're still willing to do. We're open to lots of different possibilities with our train and equip program. But it is essentially the shift.
It's now basically an equip program rather than a train and equip program, right?
No, we take some of the people out for training. We're willing to do that, and we have those training sites. So we'll take selected individuals, not the whole unit, out and give them specialized training in how to connect with us and how to connect with our enablers. So there is a training aspect to it, but you're right. Fundamentally, it's enabling groups that exist rather than trying to create brand new groups. That's the essential correction, I'd say, course correction that we made. And you asked how they're vetted. It is their leaders that are vetted. Rather than down to the individual level. And I can get you a description of that. And General Selva, maybe you'd like to say something about the vetting process in general.
We have, in the case of the Syrian Arab Coalition, convinced leaders to come to the Iraqi side of the border. We have vetted them through public and classified databases for their relationships and prior conduct. And we have spent time with them on the items that the Secretary talked about, how they link to our forces, how they communicate back their progress. And our relationship with them is relatively transactional, where we supply them with the ammunition and the advice required to strike specific targets, and then we watch that progress.
Once we decide to equip a particular group, and it sounds like it's made on a group basis, based in part on our assessment of their leaders, what degree of command and control do we retain over the group in question, over its leaders, and specifically, perhaps most importantly, over the supplies that we give them?
I could go into much more detail in a classified environment, but at the surface level, we don't exercise command and control. We exercise influence. And the influence we have is their connection to the enablers that we provide: fire support through air power, advice, and training.
Do the groups that we're supporting in this capacity, specifically the Syrian Kurds and the Syrian Arabs, do they, or to what extent do they, share the same political goals and the same vision for Syria in the future?
Today, they share the goal of wanting to take their homes back and defeat ISIL in doing so. And that is necessary and sufficient to get at the fight in eastern Syria and working our way back towards Raqqa.
Are you concerned about the possibility of their goals shifting? I mean, is it common in the region for some groups to have one focus one day and then have a priority shift? Perhaps one day having interests that align roughly with our own goals and with preserving interests that are important to American national security that might change later.
If you'd allow me to discuss that one in a classified setting on how we measure and manage that relationship, it will be much more useful than doing it in an open session.
Okay. Can you tell me roughly how many people are involved in this right now, how many units or how many members they have? Is that something we can discuss in a non-classified environment?
Yes, sir. The Syrian Arab Coalition, we brought out roughly 40 of their leaders. I'm sorry, 20 of their leaders, did a full vetting of their allegiances and their prior conduct. They brought to the battlefield roughly 1,600. The number varies up and down slightly from that number based on who's engaged in the fight, but roughly 1,600 fighters that have worked their way through roughly 3 villages or 3 towns right now in eastern Syria. They started in a place called Al-Hasaka. They have taken Al-Hal, and they are beginning the preparatory actions to prosecute a 3rd target that I'd like to keep private at this point.
Okay. I see my time's expired. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for your testimony today. This has been extremely helpful to our committee, and thank you, obviously, for your extraordinary service. In yesterday's hearing, Commander Jeffrey Eggers said that while our military victories against ISIL will affect their ability to recruit new fighters, how we conduct the war will also affect that ability. Specifically, he said that having ground troops go into Syria is what ISIL wants. On Monday, a New York Times article pointed out that in 2003, al-Zarqawi had called the Iraq War, quote, the blessed invasion, because his and ISIL's apocalyptic vision is that non-Muslims will come to Syria to fight Muslims and bring about the end of the world. So do you believe that a ground war with Western troops would help or hurt ISIL's recruiting? And which countries are best positioned to fight ISIL on the ground, in your opinion?
The forces that are best positioned to fight ISIL on the ground in both Iraq and Syria would be local indigenous forces, particularly Sunni forces, because the ISIL representation and the territory they occupy is mostly Sunni territory. Therefore, outside of so in both Iraq and Syria, Iraqis and Syrian local forces. That's why we're trying to work with them. That's why we're trying to put a political end to the civil war in Syria so that the Syrians stop Syrians who are not ISIL sympathizers, not under the thumb of ISIL right now, can unite to defeat ISIL. Next in line, and this is something that I have urged and the U.S. has urged now for some months, would be for more of Sunni Arabs from the Gulf states to become involved, not necessarily occupying territory, but participating in enabling local forces there.
Have you had any luck there? I mean, any?
Well, they have participated in the early days in the air war. Now I'm generalizing a little bit here, and not generally disinclined to participate on the ground. And of course, now with the Yemen conflict, got preoccupied with that. But,
General?
Ma'am, I think your quote of Mr. Zarqawi, I'm sorry, that said, bringing Americans to this fight is a blessing to the radical Islamic view that ISIL portrays is exactly right. What we don't do enough of is talking about who ISIL is and what they do. They're barbaric. They subjugate women. They subjugate children. They engage in extortion. They are not creating a caliphate that's consistent with Islamic teaching. They're creating a caliphate that's consistent with their narrative of Western subjugation and extremist Islam, and it's about their power and enriching themselves. And so we need to tell that truth. If we fall into the trap of radical Islamic violent extremists baiting us into a ground fight, we're actually doing exactly what they want us to do. Yeah. So as we work through and with partners that we can find that are willing to fight, they'll have the effect we need them to have.
And can we be more aggressive with our allies in the region, particularly Sunni Arab allies, to do more? I mean, I haven't seen our success there yet, so I'm wondering if you feel there's leverage there to get that result.
We have had support from Turks, from the Jordanians, as well as from a small number of our Sunni partners. That is a place where we might be able to exert some additional leverage.
Just quickly on Turkey, since you raise it, obviously Turkey is critical to the fight against ISIL. What do you think were Turkish calculations in shooting down the Russian plane, and has it affected our ability to work with Russia and Turkey?
I can only tell you what I learned from consultation with my Turkish counterpart the day of the shoot down. I actually was in Turkey that afternoon after the shoot down. They believe and executed against a incursion into their airspace. What I pressed him on, though, was securing the Turkish border from end to end. And there is a roughly 90-kilometer span of the Turkish border through which ISIL still has a fair number of smuggling lanes that are relatively open because ISIL controls the Syrian side of that border. The Turkish have redoubled their efforts. They have opened up their terrorist no-fly list, their terrorist identification database, and a variety of other techniques to help seal that border. Much beyond that, if we could do that in a closed session or a private conversation,
that would be fine. Secretary Carter, do you have anything you'd like to add?
And no, I think General Selva said it very well. The Turkey shares a border with both Syria and Iraq. That border has been used as the principal border through which fighters flowed in both directions, and we've asked the Turks to do more. They have done some more. We're helping them do yet more, but it's critical that they control their border.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, of course, ISIS wants more than anything else to preserve their caliphate. No one is arguing that there should be 100,000 troops, although the President and obviously you like to set up the straw men. It is clear that without American participation and leadership, there is no strategy to take Raqqa, which is their base of operations, where they're planning and orchestrating attacks. We just saw the manifestation of it, including working on chemical weapons. Mr. Secretary, I would beg you to call up General Keane, General Petraeus, Secretary Gates, Secretary Panetta, even former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Ask all of them, and they will tell you that a safe zone could have prevented the millions of refugees and the horrible consequences of at least 250,000 people barrel bombed. And for you to sit there, General, and say that we'd have to take out Syrian air defenses is either a stunning display of ignorance or, again, this whole aspect of avoiding or making the problem seem so huge that we can't handle it. All we have to do is protect a no-fly zone. We don't have to take out a single airplane, air defense capability of theirs. All we have to do is tell them, if you fly into this area, you're going to get shot down, which we can do with Patriot batteries. And everybody knows that. And that's why General Keane and General Petraeus and Secretary Gates, Secretary Panetta, and even Secretary Clinton have said that these things are doable. It's really saddening to see that basically business as usual while thousands and thousands of Syrians are slaughtered by this horrible barrel bombing, which also was accompanied by acts of chemical weapons. So I leave this hearing somewhat depressed, because clearly there is no strategy to take Raqqa. There is no motivation to set up a no-fly zone, which even, as I say, Hillary Clinton has supported. And every military leader that I know that was architect of the surge says you can do it without much difficulty. But we are seeing again what we've seen from this administration for the last 4 years, since some of us advocated it, saying that it would be too hard to do, ignoring the fact that as long as Bashar Assad continues to do this horrible barrel bombing, they're slaughtering thousands of innocent civilians, men, women, and children. Where is our moral? Where's the tradition of the United States of America? We went to Bosnia after they ethnically cleansed 8,000 people. This guy has killed 240,000, and yet it's too hard for the most powerful nation on earth to set up a no-fly zone. This hearing is adjourned.